talks in Paris ran late into the night as political novice Volodymyr Zelensky faced the test of his diplomatic life in his first bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian president does have something to come home with, a promise that all Ukrainian prisoners detained in Russia will be released by the end of the year, and the parties will aim for a ceasefire by the same date. But while Russia continues to deny its troops have ever been active in eastern Ukraine, Ukrainian President Zelensky admitted any ceasefire remains fragile.
I would like to outline a number of principles which I will never violate as the President of Ukraine, and with which Ukrainian people will never agree. First, there is no chance for federalization. Ukraine is a unified state.
For many in Ukraine, just holding the meeting was a concession to Putin. Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Kiev on Sunday, urging Zelensky not to give in to Russia. The Ukrainian president insisted he would never cede the Donbas region, occupied by Russian-backed separatists for more than 5 years. All sides agree in theory to holding local elections there next year, but Ukraine wants separatist forces withdrawn and the Russian border returned to Ukrainian control first. Russia wants that timing reversed.
The process of achieving ceasefire needs to be synchronized with the implementation of political reforms in Ukraine envisaged in the Minsk agreements. In the first place, this means introducing changes to the country's constitution, which give Donbas a permanent special status.
That means the leaders are no nearer to agreement over the future status of Donetsk and Luhansk, or a real end to the long conflict. Both sides have agreed to withdraw some troops from the front line by the end of March 2020 and pledged to hold another summit by that date. But with neither Russia nor Ukraine willing to give any ground, this meeting has achieved little concrete progress. Elena Casas, TRT World, Paris.
Well, for more, let's bring in our correspondent Ross Cullen, who joins us now from Moscow. Good to see you again, Ross. Now, tell us more about what progress was made during these meetings. As we heard, it was the first meeting in 3 years between the two leaders of those two countries. Are we likely to see this progress stick?
It was the first meeting, you're right. They had a phone call, the two leaders, when Volodymyr Zelensky, the new Ukrainian president, came into power in May. But this was the first bilateral, the first face-to-face meeting. So it would have taken on the issue of more of a get-to-know-you session and more of a laying the groundwork session and trying to understand the direction in which both sides are coming at this issue of the situation in eastern Ukraine. We heard in the aftermath of that bilateral meeting, Volodymyr Zelensky saying that it was very difficult to get an agreement with Vladimir Putin, but he managed to do so in a few areas. And when it comes to the talks at large, including, of course, the main mediators, the host yesterday, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, there was not going to be the chance of any major breakthrough peace deal. Because it has been so long since we had these talks, it was more of a chance to try to bring some of the energy back into the situation. We did see an agreement on an expansion of the demining operation, an agreement to try to bring in a new ceasefire. This word ceasefire has been spoken about for many years now, since 2014 and the first Minsk agreements. Maybe the leaders see some more chance for optimism of a successful implementation of a ceasefire. Also talk about another prisoner swap between Ukraine and Russia, following on from the one we saw in September. But the leaders were also, all four of them mentioned March 2020, quite early on into their media briefing, just trying to underline the fact that while this summit did take place in Paris, it was just a chance to lay the groundwork for more talks that we are likely to see in March 2020.
Now, when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine back in 2014, we saw a slew of economic sanctions being imposed against Russia. But we've also got the Ukraine now saying that it's had an impact on its economy as well. Tell us more about that impact there.
Well, the situation in Crimea, in fact, earlier in the year, it was listed as one of the fastest growing parts of Russia. But we must remember that when we're considering those figures, it's in fact coming from a low base, of course, when compared against other regions. It's only been incorporated back into the Russian Federation since 2014, when the reunification took place, as you would call it in Moscow, or the annexation as you would see it from Kiev. We saw the sectors of construction and manufacturing doing very well. There's been a bridge over the Kerch Strait joining the peninsula back to mainland Russia. There's been a new gas pipeline coming from mainland Russia, and there's been new passenger terminals at some of the airports. But when we add in, Oscar, those sectors of manufacturing and construction to energy, mining and agriculture, you can really see the loss that it's been to Ukraine, this peninsula. And some analysts looking at the situation have put the possible loss to Kiev north of $100 billion US.
Interesting. OK, we'll see what happens with the agreement that they reached at the Paris summit. Ross Cullen in Moscow, thank you for your time, as always.